plants, welcome back to my channel, Planty Princess. My name is Ashley. Today is the 6th episode of Spilling the Soil. Today we are going to talk about the one and only itty bitty Hoya Mathilde. So I actually have what I believe is the Hoya Mathilde Splash. The Splash tends to have a little more silver. It can get a lot of that really nice patchy silver, as you know, like the Hoya Wilbur Graves gets. It gets it in that like clumpiness. It can also just get a lot of that speckling, but covering a good portion of the leaf, opposed to the standard Mathilde that just has light speckles of those silver dots just kind of wandering across the leaf wherever they kind of please to go. Anyways, mine right now does have very light speckling. I'm not sure if they are the same plant or different plants, honestly, and it's just the amount of light that gives it more silver or not. But anyways, that's a whole nother video. We are going to talk a little bit about the Hoya Mathilde, some interesting facts about the Hoya Mathilde, and also I'm going to give you some care tips on how to care for this lovely Hoya. So this Hoya is actually a hybrid of the Hoya serpens and the Hoya carnosa. Now the interesting fact is it was hybridized by a man named Emilio Bagain, and in the attempt to hybridize these two plants, in January 1995, the seed pod actually split open and two Hoyas came out of it. So it's actually really crazy because these two Hoyas were not the same. They were actually two different Hoyas. So sister, sibling Hoyas, if you want to say. But in that attempt, cultivated the Hoya Mathilde, but also the Hoya choke. These two plants are very similar, obviously, because they came out of the same seed pod, but they are a little bit different. The Hoya Mathilde has a nice white fuzzy flower with a pink corona, and then the Hoya choke has more of an orangey, maybe peachy corona, if you would. And then aside from that, the Hoya choke has very little to no silver speckling on its leaves. But anyways, I just thought that was a fun little fact that I really wanted to share with you guys, because I thought it was interesting that in the attempt to hybridize these two plants, the serpents and the carnosa, not only one cultivar came out of this attempt, two different ones came out of one seed pod. I thought that was really amazing how plants can do such crazy things. Anyways, back to the Mathilde. This was a nice little plant that got hybridized, and it has really petite round leaves. If you look and the light shines through it, you can kind of see some really nice spider veiny venations. They're real thin. Again, it's when the light shines through them. If you have one of these or get one of these, hold it up to the light and kind of look through the leaf, and you can kind of see the cute veiny, veins just running through the leaf. It's super gorgeous. So I have the two new leaves here, and I have a new growth point coming in. When I first got this, it was just these two darker leaves down here. So it has started to grow quite a bit for me. This is definitely, I would say it's in between the talking about how the difficulty of care for this plant. I would say it's in between the care level of the carnosa and the serpents. I would say it's not as easy as the carnosa, but it's not as fussy as the serpents. So it is more of an easy care Hoya. It does grow particularly at a nice moderate rate. I've been getting some new growth kind of growing in ever since I got this one. Now it is spring, so of course, that's a given, but still a lot of times, even in the spring, I've gotten Hoyas, and even after acclimation, they haven't grown until, like, I got a bunch of Hoyas last spring and they didn't start to grow till this spring. So it's definitely a good sign that this one has already started to push out some new growth. This Hoya Mathilde does put out a nice white fuzzy flower with a pink corona, as I mentioned, that if given the proper care does have a really nice sweet scent to it. Also, its flowering season tends to be in spring and summer. I would say it probably won't flower in the first year. It might take 2-3 years to get a nice set of flowers. But when it does flower, those flowers are so gorgeous. The blooms are beautiful to look at. They're nice and fragrant. And as if getting any plant to bloom is a great reward. As you can see, I'm growing this Hoya in pon. I had it in sphagnum when I first got it. I was letting it root and I transferred it right to pon. So I have not got the opportunity to grow this Hoya in any other medium. But I am not growing it semi-hydroponically in pon. I'm just kind of letting it chill. I water it when the pond gets dry and then I let it dry out in between. And I don't water right when it gets dry. I probably let it sit for, a few days. And if you're going to do this, obviously it depends on, what kind of humidity you have it in, what kind of lighting you have it in. Now, obviously, I have this in my IKEA cabinet under grow lights in an east-facing window, so it does get a really good amount of bright and direct light, not anything too harsh. It gets that bright morning sun, but then again, it does have the grow lights over it as well. So it does get a decent amount of lighting. It is in high humidity though. And the temperature is also probably around 80%, but because it is in that high humidity, that allows me to kind of leave it dry for more days than if I didn't have that humidity. So if you have this plant growing in pon and you're watering it like I am, letting it drying out, if you don't have that high humidity and you have high temperatures and bright light, you're probably going to need to water it sooner than I would, because that humidity kind of keeps the leaves, the foliage, the growth, the stems from kind of drying and crisping up. So, everything as usual comes into play with this. So if you were to grow this in some soil or in leca, obviously you would keep the reservoir full 1/3 of the pot. You definitely want to make sure you feed it, you give it the nutrients it needs, because opposed to soil, even in pon, these type of mediums do not provide nutrients as soil does. So you definitely need to replace the soil nutrients with liquid nutrients. So you definitely want to make sure you're feeding your plant. I use general hydroponic nutrients, and then I also use liquid dirt as a fertilizer, and I fertilize all my plants, even my Hoyas, during every watering, because it's a nice, natural, non-harsh fertilizer on my plants, and they definitely do appreciate that. If you're going the synthetic route with this one, I would definitely say cut that recommended dose in half and maybe fertilize once a month during the growing season. If you're growing in soil, you definitely want to make sure when you water, you give it a nice thorough watering. Let it dry out, let the soil dry. You don't want to go bone dry, so that way, the next time you water, you have to literally soak your soil for it to even get that absorbent characteristic back. But you definitely do want to let it dry out. A good way to tell when this plant needs water is, you lightly just, go to the edges of your leaves, and if it doesn't feel tender at all, then obviously they have a nice amount of water still running through their leaves and they don't need a watering quite yet. A lot of thicker leafed Hoyas, this one isn't too thick, but it is a smaller leafed Hoya, so although it's not, super thick, it does have that thickness to it for a smaller leafed Hoya. So the thicker leafed Hoyas, they're super easy to tell when they need water, because they do get really flimsy, they do get really tender, and all you really have to do is touch it and you can feel that flimsy tenderness to it, and you know that that plant is thirsty. That plant does indeed need a watering. Other than that, I would say that this plant probably would do okay without a higher humidity. I like to give all my Hoyas a higher humidity. I tend to see and notice that they do grow a lot better in a higher humidity, even, like my Carnosas, Macrophyllus, Pubicalyx, those ones that are easier growing, obviously don't need it and will grow quite well without it, but even those ones, grow really great. They just grow much better because they're from that natural environment. In their native environment, that's the type of environment they're living in, the high humidity, the warm, the bright light. So providing their natural elements to them will definitely help them thrive better than they would if you're just, giving them the minimum care that requires them to stay alive rather than thrive. So definitely keep that in mind if you're able to provide a humidifier, or even just placing this in an closed space with a thing of water able to evaporate definitely does keep that humidity up a bit. And also the more plants you have in that enclosed space will also keep the humidity up as well, because plants transpire or, let out some water out of their foliage and stuff like that, which in turn evaporates into the air as well. But bright and direct light, a higher humidity, I would definitely not give this one, I would definitely not put this in a south-facing window, or, stick it right up against a grow light, because even though the leaves are a little thicker, they definitely will dry out, they definitely will crisp up. And what's really neat about these leaves is, like, you can see it, definitely not on camera, but they have like the slightest fuzz to them, which is super neat. That's always a really cool characteristic about some of the Hoyas. But I think that's all I have to say about the Hoya Mathilde. Again, this is the Hoya Mathilde Splash. Hope you learned a little bit about this lovely Hoya and thought that the fact I shared with you guys was pretty interesting. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you're interested in the content I provide. And as always, every plant's a princess. Bye!